There's some preparation. Okay. Decoding the Copper Scroll 3Q15. The Copper Scroll treasure list has captivated imaginations ever since it was unearthed in a cave by the Dead Sea in 1952. Against the tide of scholarly opinion, this investigation will show how the numbers which were paraded as biblical talents and cubits on the Copper Scroll have proved to be encrypted tables of astronomy. How fortunate we are that the scribes future-proofed the numbers on the Copper Scroll by encasing them in mathematical checksums. The use of checksums was outlined in the Talmud and is involved adding up the numbers in identifiable groups to get particular totals. In that way, the values of suspect numbers on eroded parts of the Copper Scroll were identified by the checksums. It is now fascinating to view a display of the Copper Scroll in its original tabular format, and it's like a bookkeeping ledger. There's the Copper Scroll in its original tabular format. The columns, the local site details, and some of the descriptions given were very apt to the analysis. There's the cubits, rows 1 to 63, of which only 16 could fit in on this slide. The treasures and the treasure numbers. And there's the 7 sets of Greek letters and 2 Greek loanwords, of which there's another one further down the scroll. There's spurs, and that's where the numbers at 7 of the sites stuck out like this, and it was necessary to add a spur to actually fit in the extra number. The checksum exercise led to unveiling the secret knowledge on the Copper Scroll. That encoded knowledge consisted of tables of astronomy with the orbits and long-term cycles of the planet, a calendar to map out time in lots of 777 days, identifying the layout of a cross on the Copper Scroll, 4 Paleo-Hebrew letters which spelled the name Yahweh. Let's see how the checksums had worked miracles. The checksums on the Copper Scroll. How reliable were those numbers on eroded parts of the Copper Scroll? To find out, 8 different English translations of the scroll were referenced, and there's the list of names. The 8 translators had identified mostly the same values for the numbers on the scroll. The main English translation of the Copper Scroll in this investigation was with Emily Puech, and there's the 2 publications. Puech had identified 2 sets of extra numbers on the Copper Scroll, but what was between those numbers was as dramatic as the apple that fell on Newton's head. There were plus signs between the numbers. The plus signs indicate the numbers were to be added together, and that was how the checksums were detected. With checksums, the numbers in a group are added up in sequence to see if the result was a recognizable total. The 7 sets of Greek letters formed the numbers into mini-groups. Surprisingly, the one number with 65 between the Greek letters HN and OE was the same as the first age of Enoch in Genesis chapter 5. The trail had led to the unbelievable ages of the first patriarchs in that chapter, and they proved to be the recognizable totals for the checksums. The checksum exercise began by adding up the numbers of cubits and treasures in sequence after the Greek letter HN and on row 6, right down to the last Greek letter EK on row 16. The total came to 937, which was short of the final age of Methuselah at 969 years by 32. But there was a missing number on row 16 due to erosion of the copper. By adding up the treasures only between the Greek letters DI and EK, the total at 745 was also 32 short of the final age of Lamech at 777 years. Now there's the 2 tables, Methuselah at 969, from rows 7 to 16. There's the cubits, there's the treasures, all adding up to 969, but it needed the number 32 to reach that. And the same here with Lamech at 777 years, and it needed 32 to reach his final age of 777 years. The number 32 for the missing number was confirmed by 6 checksums totals running in parallel. That was how checksums work, and the true identity of the other suspect numbers are shown in red on the spreadsheet. Spurs were added to the spreadsheet to insert extra numbers of treasures at 7 of the sites. Many of the checksums were formed into groups by the Greek letters and the spurs shown in blue. 5 totals with Lamech at 777 on the scroll. Now there's the copper scroll as I identified earlier, and there are the checksums. We saw Methuselah already, and we saw this one with Lamech. But there's Methuselah again, and there's Malachil, and they're all between the Greek letters or spurs. Now, here's the 5 listings of Lamech at 777. There's one there, there's one there, there's another there at 777, another one there, and another one there. And then there's a 777 plus 777 running from there between the spurs all the way down the scroll. The red is showing the missing or suspect numbers. And as you can see, how the checksums form. With this one, with 32, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 checksums running in parallel to verify the number 32 was correct. The tree of celestial knowledge on the copper scroll. While forming the checksums by adding the numbers in sequence, several of the orbits of the planets were encountered as follows: Mercury, Venus, solar year, lunar year, Mars. Now, because it was using tables, it was necessary to use a reference to show that tables were used in ancient times. In previous research, I had found that the various dimensions of the biblical tabernacle in square cubits had the same totals as the orbits of the planets. Planets also have long-term cycles that rarely feature with the public. The Babylonians had recorded a cycle of 8 years for Venus, and it was known as the octaries. The Dead Sea Scroll 4Q319 referred to conjunctions in the 7th and 8th year, and we know today they were with Mercury and Venus crossing the face of the sun. There were long-term cycles or goal years listed on a Babylonian tablet dating to the 4th century BCE, and there's the reference. The long-term cycles of on the tablet were 46 years with Mercury, 8 years with Venus, 79 years with Mars, and 344 years with Jupiter. The long-term cycles for all the planets were detected in the dimensions of the tabernacle and its iconic furniture as follows. And there you can read them yourself and give me a break. There's Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The ensuing investigation was dramatic, where those long-term cycles with the planets were also on the copper scroll, including the extraordinary periods of 7 years, 777 years, 777 plus 777 years, and 7,777 years. Something eye-catching happened when the tables with the planets were drawn onto a spreadsheet copy of the copper scroll. The tables formed into the shape of a tree, with a trunk laden with cubits and treasures, and the planets uniformly distributed like branches, as shown in layer C. A picture paints 1,000 words, and the orbits are shown in dark green colour and the cycles in light green. Without the checksums identifying the suspect numbers, these tables of astronomy could not have been formed. The Greek letters and spurs helped to form some tables into groups. And there is the tree, and light green and dark green. But I've shown the whole picture. But to home in on the numerical details, we'll just show part of the copper scroll. The trunk is in the middle with the cubits and the treasures. There's the suspect or missing numbers. There you can see them in red. Now, here was the orbit of Mercury. There was the orbit of Venus. There was the lunar year. There was the orbit of Jupiter. There was the orbit of Saturn, and it required multiplications because it's a big cycle, a big orbit. And there's the solar year. The rest in light green are the long-term cycles of the planets. So pause the video and study the orbits and cycles of the planets. The additions of cubits and treasures had neutralized the numbers, and thereafter they could be applied as days or years. There were now 2 archives of astronomy from antiquity, the first with the tabernacle and the second with the copper scroll, to indicate there was something very sacred lingering behind the scenes. From the book of Hebrews, the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q319, and the Gospel of Judas, it can be gleaned that the priests viewed those conjunctions with Mercury and Venus as a heavenly demonstration of the theme with light overcoming darkness relative to good and evil. And this is explained in my book, The Mystery of the Tabernacle. The timetable periods on the copper scroll. The ancient method to multiply was to add the biggest number multiple times, and there's the reference. For example, to multiply 609 by 9 on row 12 would require 609 to be added in 9 steps, and it is quite revealing where 3 additions of 609 at 1827 equate to 5 solar years, 6 additions of 609 was the recognizable number of 3654 or 10 solar years, 9 additions at 5481 equate to 15 solar years. Now the numbers in the equation, the numbers encircled by the east, west, north, and south coordinates were between, it started with rows 9 up to 14. And of course, being between the east, west, and north, it's suggested equations. And there's the first one, 22 by 4. There's the second one, 609 by 9, and 40 by 16. And it came to 6209. The total of 6209 converted to 17 solar years when using the solar year of 365.242 days. There were 5 totals of 777 on the copper scroll, of which 2 were alongside the equation with 6209 days at 17 years. This is where the purpose of the number 777 was unveiled, where there were 8 times 777 days in 17 solar years of 6209.114 days, which is 6 whole days of an overlap. And there's the 8 times 777. There was also the number 6 in the table to be deducted as intercalary days to reach the precise date exactly. The equation was the blueprint to measure time in lots of 777 days, and it involved factoring in intercalary days to synchronize the long-term periods in time to be in tune with the solar year to the very day. A theoretical example of the timetable was to map out 1,000 years of 365,242 days using the 777-day yardstick. Count out 777 days by 407 times equals 365,190 days. Therefore, 52 intercalary days had to be added to reach 365,242 days or 1,000 years precisely, as compared to in our calendar we have almost 250 leap days in 1,000 years. The complete list of the periods and their intercalary days formed from the numbers on the copper scroll is shown on layer B. Now there's the periods that were identified down there. There's the intercalary days that had to be added on. Again, there's the periods of the remainder, and there's the intercalary days right up to one cycle of the zodiac. Now, here's the copper scroll, and here's the first 16 sites or rows. And here are the list on the bottom of the various intercalary days. And in this module, with just one module, there was 3 intercalary days formed. There was 15 formed, 32 formed, etc., right up to 1251. And they were all between Greek letters or loanwords. And here the remainder was with 2 modules. And they were again all between Greek letters and loanwords. And here there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 periods from the calendar. And there they are listed at 1700, 117, 177, and 1000. And also 777 days. And they were all between Greek letters or loanwords. Now, we already outlined the equation, and here it is with the rows, the cubes, the treasures, and Greeks. And this on row 9 to 13 was the equation to form 6209 days in 17 years, and it's alternative display with 8 times 777 days. Now, further down the scroll, on rows 47, 48, and 49, were an assembly kit of numbers to form the periods of 300, 600, 3000, 6000, 12,000, and those extra periods. Pause the video and check how 11 of the intercalary days from the timetable were precisely between Greek letters and lower words, as I have just outlined. and same with the 5 tables and the assembly kit of numbers. The image of a cross on the copper scroll. Seven totals of 777 ran like a spine down the copper scroll from row 10 to row 57 and was shown in the checksums. And on row 10 to row 13 were the 8 times 777 days in 17 years in the exact place on the spine where the beam would be situated to form the shape of a cross. At the top of the cross were the 5 periods of, and there they are, which had featured in the timetable. It was apt how in ancient times the east, west, north and south coordinates that encircled the equation on the scroll symbolized the solar cross. Without the numbers identified by the checksums, the cross would not have been formed. There is the copper scroll, and there was the numbers that were suspect or missing. And there's the cross, and you can see there's one 777, another one there, and a further more down this road. And there's the cross here with 8 times 777. There's the east, south, north, and west to signify a solar cross. And there were the extra numbers, which were in the timetable. The divine name Yahweh on the copper scroll. The ancient Paleo-Hebrew alphabet originated with pictorial images similar to the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and it was known as the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. It was striking how some of the tables with the extra treasures in the spurs formed into pictorial images on the copper scroll, which bore a resemblance with 4 Paleo-Hebrew letters, Yahweh. That's Yahweh in Paleo-Hebrew here. The Paleo-Hebrew letters read from right to left, and that position will apply in the rest of the analysis. Now here's the first of the Paleo-Hebrew letters with the letter He, and it formed from the table here with the 3 outstretched arms and added up to 777. And it knows the Greek letter and the spurs. There's the modular version, and look how it looked like with the letter, Paleo-Hebrew letter He. Here's the second Paleo-Hebrew letter He. And again, this was formed from Set at 807 years. And it was the total from rows 33 to 48. Look at the outstretched arms with the extra numbers of 2, 4, and 20. There's the modular version. And look how it looks like the Paleo-Hebrew letter He. The third Paleo-Hebrew letter was with Wa, or W in the English language. And it was formed from 3 totals of 777. That's the first one, there's the second one, and look how this one goes down here. And we're all being spurs or Greek letters. Again, the modular version is shown here, and look how similar it is to the Paleo-Hebrew letter Wa. The fourth Paleo-Hebrew letter was Yod, or Y in the English language. And it was formed from the numbers of cubits and treasures from row 38 to row 58. And the total added up to 1653, which as years was 777 days by 777 times. Now again, it had spurs. And look how the spurs stuck out, there, and there. And the modular version is similar. And look how similar it is to the Paleo-Hebrew letter Yod. The 4 letters spelled Yahweh were skillfully positioned on the copper scroll. The word spur of a rock on row 10, together with threshold, platform, boulder, and parapet, elsewhere on the scroll, indicate ledges jutting out and prompted of having spurs to cater for the extra treasures. This is complemented where the Greek loanwords peristyle on the scroll means a porch with columns extending from the main building, and parabolas, pardon my Greek, was boundary stones to indicate imaginary boundaries. Without the numbers identified by the checksums, it would have been impossible to have the name Yahweh on the copper scroll. How divine it was where the four Paleo-Hebrew letters were just above the pedestal of 600 talents on row 61, and the only 600 talents in the Bible was the waste of treasures to decorate the holiest house of Yahweh in Solomon's temple. Now there is the copper scroll, and here, starting over here, is Yod. We've already outlined it. Over here was the He. Over here was the Wa. And finally, there was the final He. Now notice in red, that's where the suspect numbers were. If they weren't being recognised, we couldn't have found there, or the Wa, or the second He, or the Yod. And there is the 600 talents here, which are referred to, which was the same as the 600 talents used to decorate the holiest house of Yahweh in Solomon's temple. The sealed scroll in books of Isaiah, Daniel, and Revelation. Do you recall the references to a sealed scroll in the books of Isaiah, Daniel, and Revelation, and how nobody could open its 7 seals? The sealed scroll was written on both sides, but so was the copper scroll, with the shapes of the hammered letters visible on both sides. Had Isaiah the copper scroll in mind when he wrote, "Now go, write it before them in a table, and note it on a scroll, that it may be for a time to come, for ever and ever"? It was fitting because the numbers on the copper scroll had to be written on a table, and the words had been noted on a scroll. The timetable periods on the copper scroll were also with a time to come, forever and ever. Isaiah struck a chord with treasures in the same chapter where he wrote, "Ye shall defile also the coverings of thy graven images of silver, and the ornaments of molten images of gold. Thou shalt cast them away as a menstruous cloth." That was what happened where the defiling treasures of gold and silver were cast aside when the numbers on the copper scroll were seen to be significant. Ancient cultures associated the menstrual cycle with the lunar month, and thus Isaiah had insinuated the moon, because he followed up by writing that the light of the moon shall be the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days. The sevenfold was the raison d'etre of the copper scroll, with 777 days, 7 years, 777 years, 777 plus 777 years, 7,777 years, and 777 days by 777 times. That was 6 periods with the 7th, and Isaiah made it sevenfold with 7 days, as was shown up here. The inspired numerical masterpiece from antiquity. This scientific wonder with the copper scroll survived the elements of time and space to reveal the stunning masterpiece of a superintelligence. How modest the encoding with those 3 layers of numerical data on the copper scroll, involving just simple additions and only 7 multiplications. Then came the rocket science, when the 3 layers of data were overlaid on top of each other, displaying a miraculous jigsaw of numerical wizardry. The image of a cross and the autograph of Yahweh cast a supernatural halo over the time capsule from Qumran. We will end the expedition by browsing through the magical layers of scientific artwork on the copper scroll, which were autographed by Yahweh. Now for the big picture, where science and faith unite. There was the 23 checksums you've already seen. There is the display with the intercalary days and the timetable periods. There was the 2 assembly kits of numbers on the copper scroll that made up the timetable. There was the tables of astronomy, which we've already outlined. There was the cross. And there is another surprise here, where there was 2 displays with each of the Paleo letters, Yahweh. We already have seen the display in black with the 777 by 777 times. But in parallel was 777 plus 777 with the long-term cycle of Jupiter. and again it was between two spurs. Then there was we had seen the he with the age of Set at 807 years. But here in blue, in parallel, was Venus and also 777 as years. Up here, in parallel, we've seen the black with Wa, with the three 777s. But in parallel was the orbit of Mars, the long-term cycle of Mars, and the long-term cycle of Jupiter. And again, they're all between Greek letters. Over here was the letter He with a total of 777. But just almost, well, not in parallel, just on top of it, was another 777 with three orbits of Venus to represent the letter He. Now, it is amazing. It's like a confirmation that the Yahweh was intended, because look at them in parallel. If that one here was up there and the blue one here was down there, it wouldn't have consolidated that Yahweh was intended. This one was also in parallel. This one also in parallel. So definitely the name Yahweh was intended. And look at the pedestal of 600 talents with the Paleo Hebrew, with the weights of the treasures to decorate the holiest house in Solomon's temple. It's now your turn to answer the profound question. Could mere mortals in antiquity have acquired, devised, and encoded the rocket science displays of celestial knowledge on the copper scroll? It was equally astonishing where the key to open the seven seals on the secret scroll was at the other extreme, to simply add the numbers as prompted by the plus signs. The autograph of Yahweh, the image of the cross, and the tables of astronomy could not have been formed without the miracle performed by the checksums. Did this scientific knowledge of astronomy symbolize the architecture of a mystical heaven as visualized by the prophets and autographed by Yahweh? The configuration with the planets overlaid on the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant was the supreme endorsement that such a celestial dominion existed. How fortunate we are that the custodians wrote the keys to the kingdom of the heavens on an indurable copper scroll. There's no longer a need for treasure hunters to go on escapades into the hills looking for elusive crocks of gold at the end of the rainbow. The tables of facts and figures from the copper scroll are in my book, Unlocking the Secret Scroll, and it is on my website, 7biblewonders.com and on Amazon. I repeat that, 7biblewonders.com and on Amazon. If you would like to debate the issues, chat with me on the blog on my website. Thanking you for bearing with me, and please spread the good word about the divine archive of astronomy on the copper scroll. I'm Michael Harns from Dublin, Ireland. And thank you. And I now have to sign out. I have to go through the procedure of signing out.